Then there was more of the real stars, maybe even than now. Although the power of television, the power of media is so much bigger today, more people know about it. But I think that in the period that I raced, there was considerably more camaraderie. People have asked me the same question for years. They ask about the 3 World Championships. They ask about the wins, the pole positions, the battles with Ferrari, Lotus and Brabham. Quite a few want to talk about my campaign to make Formula One safer, while others simply want to know which race I remember most. Those are all fair questions, and after all these years I'm always happy to answer them. But every now and then someone asks me something that makes me stop for a moment. Jackie, who were the greatest drivers you ever saw? That sounds simple until you actually try to answer it, because greatness has never been measured by championships alone. I've raced against remarkable men, watched generations come and go, and spent decades around this sport long after I climbed out of the cockpit for the last time. Some drivers won everything. Others never had the machinery to show what they were truly capable of. A few changed Formula One without needing the biggest trophy cabinet. What stays with me isn't just who was quickest over one lap or who collected the most victories. It's the drivers who made everyone else raise their standard the moment they arrived. The ones who could do something with a racing car that the rest of us simply couldn't explain. The ones who left an impression that never faded, even decades later. So today, that's the question I'd like to answer, not with statistics or records, but with memories. These are the men who, in my eyes, defined excellence in Formula One and reminded me just how extraordinary this sport has always been. Let me start with Jim Clark. If there was ever a driver who made the impossible look completely natural, it was Jim. Before I became a world champion myself, I watched him race with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. As fellow Scots, we shared more than a nationality. We shared an understanding of what racing demanded, and from the very beginning I knew I was looking at someone truly extraordinary. People often describe Jim as effortlessly fast, and that's exactly how he appeared. But what made him special wasn't simply his speed, it was the way he achieved it. He never seemed to force a racing car into doing something it didn't want to do. Every steering input was smooth. Every correction was almost invisible. Watching him through a fast corner, you could easily underestimate just how close he was to the limit. What separated Jim from everyone else was his instinct. He seemed to understand a car long before anyone else did. Whether the circuit was dry or damp, whether the setup was perfect or slightly off, he adapted almost immediately. Drivers talk about feeling connected to a car, but Jim took that connection to another level. He wasn't driving against the machine, he was working with it. One performance that always stays in my mind is the Belgian Grand Prix in 1963 at Spa. Those roads were frightening even by the standards of that era, and the weather only made them more dangerous. Jim mastered those conditions and finished several minutes ahead of the field. That wasn't just a victory, it was a demonstration of complete control when almost everyone else was simply trying to survive. His 1965 season was another reminder of just how remarkable he was. Winning 6 of the first 7 championship races sounds impressive today, but in those days reliability was never guaranteed. Cars broke down regularly, circuits offered almost no forgiveness, and every race carried enormous risks. Jim still managed to dominate with a calmness that made greatness look routine. Then came Hockenheim in 1968. His fatal accident during a Formula 2 race shocked every one of us. We had already lost too many friends in motor racing, but losing Jim felt deeply personal. It reminded me that even the finest talent in the world offered no protection against the dangers we had accepted for far too long. That tragedy strengthened my determination to fight for better safety standards throughout Formula One. When I think about Jim today, I don't think first about championships or statistics. I remember his humility, his quiet confidence, and the incredible respect he earned without ever asking for attention. He showed all of us that true greatness doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes it simply speaks through the way a driver guides a racing car around a circuit. That's why Jim Clark has never left my mind, and I don't believe he ever will. Now, this one belongs to a completely different generation. By the time Ayrton Senna arrived in Formula One, I had already retired from racing, but I never stopped watching the sport. I had become a commentator, an observer, and someone who still cared deeply about what happened every Grand Prix weekend. It didn't take long to realize that Senna was unlike anyone who had come before him. People naturally remember his incredible speed, especially over a single qualifying lap. That was certainly part of his greatness, but it wasn't the whole story. What impressed me most was how completely committed he was every time he climbed into the cockpit. There never seemed to be a casual lap with Ayrton. Every session mattered, every corner mattered, and every detail mattered. What made him different wasn't simply that he could drive faster than everyone else. It was the precision with which he found that extra performance. He could sense grip where other drivers found none. In changing weather, particularly when rain arrived, he seemed to process the conditions faster than anyone around him. While others reacted to the circuit, Ayrton appeared to anticipate what it was about to do. One performance that perfectly captured that ability came at Donington Park in 1993. The opening lap has become legendary, and deservedly so. In dreadful conditions, he carved his way through the field with remarkable confidence and control. Watching it unfold, I wasn't thinking about bravery alone. I was watching someone whose understanding of a racing car bordered on extraordinary. There was another side to Ayrton that I always respected as well. He demanded excellence from himself, from his engineers, and from everyone around him. That intensity wasn't always easy for others to live with, but history has shown that many of the greatest competitors possess that same relentless drive. They refuse to accept average because they know exactly what they're capable of achieving. Of course, no discussion about Ayrton can avoid Imola in 1994. His death at the San Marino Grand Prix affected Formula One in ways that are still felt today. For me, it was another heartbreaking reminder that despite all the progress we had made, our work on safety could never stop. Losing a talent like Ayrton was devastating, but it also accelerated changes that have since saved countless lives. When I think about Ayrton Senna now, I don't only remember the pole positions or the championships. I remember a man who pursued perfection with absolute conviction, even knowing the risks that came with it. He reminded the entire world what complete commitment looked like behind the wheel of a Formula One car. Very few drivers have ever possessed that combination of speed, focus, and unwavering belief. That's why Ayrton Senna remains one of the greatest drivers I have ever witnessed, and one I'll always speak about with enormous respect. Here's where things became very different. Alain Prost never looked spectacular in the way some other champions did, and I think that's exactly why people underestimated him for so many years. If you only watched the highlights, you might have thought another driver was quicker. But if you watched an entire season, race after race, you began to understand why Alain won 4 world championships. What made him exceptional was never raw speed alone. It was his ability to think further ahead than everyone else. While many drivers focused on the next corner or the next lap, Alain always seemed to be thinking about the final 20 laps of the race. He understood tyre wear, fuel consumption, mechanical sympathy, and race strategy better than almost anyone I have ever seen. He didn't waste speed where it wasn't needed because he knew exactly where it would matter later. That approach earned him the nickname the Professor, and it suited him perfectly. Formula One is often portrayed as a contest of courage, but it is equally a contest of intelligence. Alain proved that year after year. He rarely allowed emotion to dictate his decisions. Even under enormous championship pressure, he remained remarkably composed. One season that demonstrated his brilliance was 1986. Driving for McLaren, Alain won the World Championship, despite Williams appearing to have the stronger package for much of the year. Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet were taking points from each other, while Alain consistently placed himself in the right position. Then came the dramatic finale in Australia, where Mansell's tyre failure changed everything. Alain had already made this strategic decision to stop for fresh tyres, and it helped secure one of the most remarkable championships of his career. Of course, people also remember his rivalry with Ayrton Senna. It was one of the greatest rivalries Formula One has ever known, because their strengths were so different. Ayrton often found incredible speed through sheer commitment, while Alain relied on patience, calculation, and precision. They pushed each other to extraordinary levels, and the sport benefited from having two completely different philosophies competing for the same prize. Watching Alain over the years reminded me that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's almost invisible until the checkered flag falls. He understood that championships are rarely won by driving every lap at 100%. They're won by making the right decision at exactly the right moment over and over again across an entire season. That's one lesson I carried with me long after my own driving career ended. Talent can win races, but judgment wins championships. Alain Prost understood that better than almost anyone I've ever watched, and that's why he'll always deserve a place among the greatest drivers I ever witnessed. And then there was Michael Schumacher. By the time Michael arrived in Formula One, the sport was changing once again. Technology was advancing quickly, teams were becoming larger, and every tiny advantage mattered more than ever before. Yet, even in that new environment, it didn't take long to recognize that Michael was operating on a level very few drivers ever reach. People often talk about his 7 world championships or the extraordinary success he enjoyed with Ferrari, but those achievements were the result of something much deeper. What made Michael different wasn't simply that he drove quickly. It was the amount of work he was willing to do when nobody was watching. He treated Formula One like a full-time commitment every single day of the year. Testing sessions that other drivers might have considered routine became opportunities for Michael to improve every detail of the car. He built incredibly close relationships with his engineers because he understood that championships are won by an entire team, not by one driver alone. His technical feedback became one of his greatest strengths, helping Ferrari develop into the dominant force of the early 2000s. I remember watching that transformation with enormous respect. Ferrari had endured years without a drivers' championship before Michael arrived. Success didn't happen overnight. It came through patience, relentless preparation, and thousands of small improvements that most people outside the garage never saw. By the time he won the championship in 2000, it felt less like a surprise and more like the reward for years of disciplined work. What also impressed me was his consistency. Weekend after weekend, Michael extracted almost everything his car had to offer. Even on days when victory wasn't possible, he found a way to collect valuable points. That level of concentration across an entire season is incredibly difficult to maintain, especially when every rival is trying to beat you. Of course, like many great champions, Michael's career wasn't free from controversy. Moments such as Adelaide in 1994 and Jerez in 1997 continue to divide opinion, and history has judged those incidents accordingly. But when I assess a driver's ability, I also look at everything else they brought to the sport. Michael's work ethic, leadership, physical preparation, and commitment helped redefine what modern Formula One drivers needed to become. He showed that natural talent alone would never be enough in the years ahead. The greatest drivers would also need to become exceptional athletes, dedicated teammates, and relentless competitors away from the race circuit. Whenever I think about Michael Schumacher, I don't just see a champion collecting trophies. I see someone who changed the standards of Formula One itself. Every generation leaves the sport a little different than it found it, and Michael undoubtedly did exactly that. That's why he'll always be one of the greatest drivers I've ever had the privilege to witness. And finally, there is Lewis Hamilton. I've been fortunate enough to watch Formula One across more than half a century, which means I've seen the sport reinvent itself time and time again. Different regulations, different technology, different generations of drivers. Every era produces someone people believe could never be matched. Then another remarkable talent comes along and changes the conversation once again. That's exactly what Lewis has done. What impressed me from the beginning wasn't simply how quickly he adapted to Formula One. Many young drivers arrive with speed. Very few arrive looking completely comfortable against the very best in the world. Lewis did exactly that in his rookie season in 2007 to challenge Fernando Alonso, the reigning two-time world champion. As a newcomer was something almost nobody expected. It showed extraordinary confidence without ever looking overwhelmed by the occasion. What made Lewis different was his adaptability. He succeeded with V8 cars, hybrid cars, changing tyre compounds, evolving regulations, and entirely different styles of racing. That's much harder than most people realize. Some champions dominate one specific era because everything suits their strengths. Lewis proved he could remain at the very top while Formula One itself continued to evolve around him. One performance that always stands out to me came at the British Grand Prix in 2008. Silverstone was drenched with rain, visibility was dreadful, and even experienced drivers struggled to keep their cars on the circuit. Lewis won by more than a minute, while much of the field spun or ran off the track. Watching that race reminded me of the greatest wet weather performances I'd seen from Jim Clark and Ayrton Senna. It wasn't just speed. It was complete control in conditions that punished even the smallest mistake. Another quality I've admired is his composure under enormous public scrutiny. Drivers from my generation lived very different lives away from the circuit. Lewis has competed in an age of constant media attention and social media while carrying the expectations that come with being one of the biggest names in world sport. Through all of that, he continued performing at an exceptionally high level for well over a decade. I've always believed that every generation should be judged within its own context. Comparing drivers from different eras will never produce a perfect answer because the sport changes too much. But true greatness always finds a way to stand out, regardless of the circumstances, and Lewis has certainly done that. When I think about Lewis Hamilton, I see far more than records and championships. I see a driver who proved that sustained excellence is one of the hardest achievements in Formula One. Remaining hungry, adapting to change, and continuing to compete against younger generations year after year requires qualities that statistics alone can never fully explain. That's why Lewis Hamilton completes this list. He belongs alongside every great driver I've had the privilege to witness, and I have no doubt that future generations will look back on his career with the same admiration that my generation still holds for the legends who came before him. Looking back now, I realize that Formula One has given me far more than trophies or championships ever could. Those achievements were important, of course, but they were only part of the journey. What has stayed with me the longest are the people I had the privilege to race alongside and the extraordinary drivers I was fortunate enough to watch across so many different generations. Every one of them taught me something different. Jim Clark showed me what natural talent truly looked like. Ayrton Senna reminded the world what absolute commitment could achieve. Alain Prost proved that intelligence can be just as powerful as courage. Michael Schumacher changed the standard of professionalism, while Lewis Hamilton demonstrated how greatness can endure even as the sport continues to evolve. People often ask whether I wish I could race in today's Formula One. The truth is, I'm simply grateful that I was able to witness so many remarkable eras. Few people are lucky enough to see a sport transform over decades while still recognizing the same qualities that define every truly great champion. The cars will continue to change. New records will eventually replace old ones. Future generations will discover heroes of their own. But the feeling of lining up beside extraordinary competitors, knowing you're sharing the circuit with someone capable of redefining what is possible, is something that never leaves you. Those are the memories I value most, and they'll stay with me for the rest of my life.